When we think of Hollywood's golden age, we picture glamour, perfection, and stars who seemed larger than life. But behind that glittering surface was another story, one the studios worked hard to hide. Some of the most beloved actors of the 20th century carried secrets darker than any role they played. Juvenile crime, gang connections, prison sentences, even manslaughter. Powerful studios spent fortunes covering up scandals. Police reports disappeared, court records were sealed, and publicity machines rewrote personal histories. To the public, these stars looked like flawless icons. In reality, some were walking straight out of reform schools, bar fights, and even prison cells before stepping into the spotlight. Ironically, those troubled pasts often gave them the authenticity that made them unforgettable on screen. Steve McQueen's rebellious cool, James Cagney's gangster menace, John Garfield's defiance, all felt so real because, in many ways, they were. In this video, we'll uncover the hidden criminal histories of Hollywood's legends. Stories that reveal just how thin the line was between the roles they played and the lives they actually lived. Steve McQueen, the king of cool with a criminal past. Steve McQueen's rugged charisma made him the highest paid actor of the 1970s. But long before The Great Escape or Bullet, he was a troubled kid with a rap sheet, born into chaos, abandoned by his father and neglected by his mother. McQueen drifted into gangs before he was even a teenager. By 9, he was stealing and vandalizing. By 14, he was fighting in the streets and facing arrests that landed him in reform school. Hollywood would later polish this part of his biography into a story of a rough childhood. But the truth was more severe. McQueen wasn't simply a rebellious kid. He was a juvenile delinquent who narrowly avoided a life of serious crime. Ironically, reform school was both his punishment and his salvation. At the California Junior Boys Republic, McQueen finally experienced discipline and consequences. Years later, he would return there to visit and inspire young men still caught in the cycle he had narrowly escaped. He admitted that the structure saved him, though publicity departments at the time softened this into a tale of boarding school hardship. After reform school, McQueen joined the Marines and carried his defiance with him. He spent time in the brig for going AWOL, another fact that Hollywood reframed as independent spirit. But in reality, McQueen's rebellious streak was dangerous and self-destructive before it became his brand. What makes his story fascinating is how much of his past bled into his screen persona. Directors often commented that McQueen didn't need to act tough. He radiated toughness because he had lived it. In Papillon, where he played a prison escapee, audiences weren't just seeing fiction, they were watching echoes of a man who knew confinement, rebellion, and consequence firsthand. Today, McQueen's story reminds us that Hollywood's legends were often shaped by very real pain. The king of cool wasn't born smooth. He fought his way out of a broken childhood and criminal beginnings, and that fight never really left his eyes. Danny Trejo. From San Quentin to the silver screen, most Golden Age stars did everything possible to bury their criminal records. Danny Trejo, however, flipped the script. Instead of hiding his past, he embraced it. And that honesty turned him into one of Hollywood's most beloved character actors. Trejo's story is raw. By age 12, he was already using heroin. By 15, he was committing armed robberies. Through the 1960s, he cycled in and out of California's toughest prisons: San Quentin, Folsom, Soledad. His rap sheet included assault, robbery, and drug charges. In another era, such a record would have been career-ending, but modern Hollywood saw his scars, tattoos, and hard-won wisdom as authenticity, not liability. His turning point didn't come from a studio cover-up, but from rehabilitation. After leaving prison, Trejo became a drug counselor, determined to help others avoid his mistakes. One day, while visiting a client on the set of the 1985 film Runaway Train, he bumped into a screenwriter he had met in prison. That chance encounter changed everything. First hired as a boxing trainer, Trejo soon landed a small role, and his career snowballed from there. Unlike stars of the Golden Age who depended on studios to sanitize their reputations, Trejo leaned into his truth. He told audiences openly, "I was a drug addict and armed robber. I don't hide where I came from because it's part of who I am." Instead of tarnishing his image, his honesty made him more relatable. Directors like Robert Rodriguez cast him repeatedly, knowing Trejo didn't need to study prison behavior or criminal psychology. He had lived it. That authenticity became his trademark. His face, weathered and scarred, wasn't airbrushed for the screen. It became a symbol of survival and transformation. While Hollywood of the 1930s hid Spencer Tracy's bar fights or Mickey Rooney's arrests, Trejo built his career on the very things studios once buried. Today, Trejo is not just an actor but an entrepreneur and community figure, often speaking at prisons and recovery programs. His life demonstrates a different kind of Hollywood story, not one of hidden scandals, but of transparency, resilience, and second chances. Paul Kelly. The actor who killed and came back. Most Golden Age actors had their scandals hidden or reframed, but Paul Kelly's story stands out for its sheer gravity. He wasn't just a delinquent or a man with shady friends. He was a convicted killer who served time in San Quentin before returning to Hollywood as a respected leading man. Kelly began as a child actor in silent films and transitioned smoothly into Broadway roles. By the mid-1920s, he was a rising star. But in 1927, his personal life spiraled into a tragedy that could have destroyed his career forever. Kelly was romantically involved with Dorothy McKay, a stage actress who was married to actor Ray Raymond. When Raymond discovered the affair, he confronted Kelly. The confrontation turned violent. Kelly beat Raymond so severely that he died 2 days later from his injuries. The trial was sensational. Newspapers across the country carried every detail, and the once promising actor was convicted of manslaughter. He was sentenced to up to 10 years in San Quentin. For most performers, that would have been the end. Hollywood rarely forgave even whispers of scandal, let alone a homicide conviction. But here's the twist. Kelly only served about 2 years before being paroled. Against all odds, he managed to return to acting, and not just in minor parts. Studios carefully reconstructed his public image, quietly erasing his conviction from promotional material. Publicists framed his absence from the screen as a break for personal reasons. Even more shocking, Kelly later married Dorothy McKay, the very woman whose husband he had killed. What could have been a career-ending scandal was spun into a tragic love story. Hollywood's publicity machine turned a manslaughter conviction into a narrative of romance and redemption. Remarkably, audiences seemed willing to accept it. Kelly resumed his career and appeared in films such as Crossfire and The High and the Mighty. Instead of being permanently branded as a criminal, he was recast as a rugged, honorable man on screen. Film historian Anthony Slide called Kelly's return perhaps the most successful image rehabilitation in Hollywood history. His case reveals the extraordinary power of Hollywood's image-making machine. It wasn't just about polishing reputations, it could rewrite reality itself. Kelly's career is proof that in the right hands, even the darkest scandal could be reframed into a story the public was willing to accept. James Cagney, gangster icon with rumored mob ties. James Cagney is remembered as the ultimate gangster of classic Hollywood. His explosive energy in The Public Enemy and White Heat defined the genre. But many wondered, how did he capture the criminal world so convincingly? Part of the answer lies in whispers that followed him for decades, rumors of real connections to the underworld. Kagny grew up in New York's Lower East Side, a place where street gangs and mobsters shape daily life. Biographers suggest he not only observed these figures, but may have built friendships that lasted into his acting years. During the 1930s, the FBI even kept him under surveillance, suspecting ties to organized crime and violent union activity. While no charges were filed, the fact that he drew federal attention speaks volumes. Warner Brothers worked tirelessly to counter the rumors. Publicists emphasized his background as a dancer and intellectual, insisting his gangster roles came purely from talent. Still, directors like Raoul Walsh swore that Kagny brought a truth to his performances others couldn't fake. "Jimmy knows something about these men," Walsh remarked. "It's in his blood, whether or not he ever crossed the line into criminal activity." Kagny's lived experience gave his characters an authenticity that shaped cinema. Martin Scorsese later said Kagny's portrayals felt like documentaries of American crime. In other words, he didn't just play gangsters, he made them feel real, leaving a legacy that still influences film today. John Garfield. From street thief to screen rebel, John Garfield's screen presence in films like Body and Soul and Force of Evil felt raw, rebellious, and deeply human. That authenticity came from his own past. A boy from New York's Lower East Side who grew up in poverty and petty crime. Born Julius Garfinkel to Russian Jewish immigrants, Garfield spent his youth running with neighborhood gangs. He admitted in later interviews that he was arrested several times for theft and fighting. Biographers note he survived by pickpocketing and stealing. the kind of street survival that could have easily turned into a permanent criminal life. Unlike other stars who hid troubled pasts completely, Garfield occasionally acknowledged his rough beginnings, though Warner Brothers made sure to frame it as a tough childhood rather than outright crime. Garfield's story is also significant because he didn't fully sanitize it. He never bragged, but he didn't deny his background either. That small act of honesty cracked Hollywood's illusion of moral perfection, paving the way for more complex, flawed star images in later decades. Anthony Quinn. From East LA gangs to global stardom, Anthony Quinn, the two-time Oscar winner known for Zorba the Greek and Viva Zapata, carried with him a past rooted in poverty and violence. Born in Mexico and raised in East Los Angeles, Quinn's early years were marked by hardship, surrounded by street gangs. He joined them for protection and identity. By his teens, he had already faced assault charges for street fights. What saved him from a darker path was art. Quinn discovered a talent for drawing and sculpture, eventually catching the attention of architect Frank Lloyd Wright, who encouraged his creative pursuits. This artistic lifeline pulled him away from gang life and toward acting. Yet his rough beginnings left a permanent mark, on stage and screen. Quinn radiated volatility and strength. Directors observed that he brought something others couldn't fake, the eyes of someone who had seen both brutality and survival. His performances in roles tied to marginalized or struggling communities carried an authenticity rooted in his own experiences. Over time, he transformed himself into a sophisticated figure, multilingual, an art collector, and a writer. This reinvention only made his performances richer. Quinn's journey shows that Hollywood didn't just erase troubled pasts. Sometimes, those pasts became the hidden fuel that made legends unforgettable. Mickey Rooney, child star with a hidden wild side. Mickey Rooney was America's sweetheart during the 1930s and 40s. As Andy Hardy, he embodied the wholesome, all-American boy. Polite, moral, and optimistic. But off-screen, Rooney's real life was far from innocent. Behind the studio-created image, Rooney was a troubled youth. Biographers reveal he was often in trouble for shoplifting, vandalism, and reckless behavior. He was arrested for disorderly conduct more than once, and even faced a drunk driving incident at age 19. The contrast between image and reality was extreme. While audiences saw him as the picture of morality, those who knew him described a restless, rebellious teenager who struggled with the pressures of fame. MGM executives, particularly studio head Louis B. Mayer, invested heavily in protecting Rooney's marketability, rewriting his history to keep the Andy Hardy fantasy alive. Ironically, this double life may have fueled Rooney's struggles later. He admitted in later years, "I was the most supervised and least guided child in Hollywood. Everyone watched me, but no one really saw me." His wild side was never addressed, only hidden. Rooney's story highlights how dangerous the studio system's obsession with perfection could be. Instead of helping troubled young stars, studios simply polished their images and ignored reality. In Rooney's case, the illusion of innocence became a burden he carried for decades. Spencer Tracy, from bar fights to Oscar glory. Spencer Tracy is remembered as one of Hollywood's greatest actors, celebrated for his quiet authority in films like Boys Town and Judgment at Nuremberg. But long before he embodied moral integrity on screen, Tracy's real life was anything but calm. In his younger years, Tracy was notorious for heavy drinking, bar fights, and multiple arrests for disorderly conduct. Biographers record that he spent more than a few nights in jail cells in Milwaukee and New York. These rough years shaped him, but when he came to Hollywood, MGM erased the entire history. Tracy as the thoughtful, measured man who naturally fit roles of priests, judges, and mentors. References to his arrests vanished from public records, and newspapers quietly dropped the stories. By the late 1930s, audiences believed in a version of Tracy that was more myth than truth. Ironically, the turmoil he once lived may have fueled his brilliance. Directors often noted the contained intensity in his performances, as if he understood what it meant to wrestle with emotions beneath the surface. George Cukor, who worked with him repeatedly, said Tracy had a way of showing the effort it takes for a man to stay in control. That authenticity made him unique. Tracy went on to win 2 consecutive Academy Awards and became a symbol of moral authority. Yet his early past reminds us how much Hollywood depended on illusion. Without MGM's intervention, the bar fighter might never have become the legend audiences adored. The golden age of Hollywood promised audiences glamour, elegance, and stars who seemed larger than life. But as we've seen, many of those icons carried shadows: juvenile delinquency, gang ties, alcoholism, violence, and even manslaughter. Studios went to extraordinary lengths to bury these truths. Police records disappeared, scandals were reframed, and carefully crafted publicity turned troubled men into flawless legends. For decades, audiences never questioned it. They believed the illusion because that was all they were shown. Yet the irony is that these troubled pasts often made the stars unforgettable. Steve McQueen's raw edge, James Cagney's gangster menace, John Garfield's defiance, Anthony Quinn's intensity, all came from lived experience. The very things Hollywood tried to hide were also the secret to their power on screen. Today, we live in a different era. Modern stars like Danny Trejo embrace their past instead of concealing it, and audiences often respect them more for their honesty. But in the 1930s and 40s, perfection wasn't optional. It was survival. A single rumor could end a career, so the illusion had to be maintained at all costs. These stories remind us of a larger truth. Cinema has always been about balancing reality and fantasy. Behind every polished performance may lie scars, struggles, and secrets. Perhaps that's why these legends still captivate us, because even if we didn't know it, we were watching fragments of their real lives reflected on the screen. So now the question is yours. Knowing what you know today, does it change the way you see these stars? Do their past crimes make them less admirable or more human? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more hidden histories of Hollywood, don't forget to like and subscribe.